We now turn to agenda item 6, report number 1, items for decision. I will now move reception of that report and ask the Council to approve the recommendations of each paragraph. Paragraph 1 is for decision, and can I invite Councillor Thomas to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors. I'm speaking against the paragraph, and I fear, Councillor Ellis, I may be about to disappoint you because I'm possibly feeling less consensual about this particular paper than some others in the past. I think the reason for that is quite simple. In looking at the issues presented in the paper, we need to ask ourselves not just what is the situation now, but how did we get here? The housing situation in our borough and our ability now as a council to respond to it is not something that's just happened. It's the product of decisions that have been taken over the last 35 years under a Conservative administration. And I'm afraid that this is a record for which we're now paying the consequences, and which, I have to say this, the members opposite have to take some responsibility. If you look at the housing revenue account, one of the striking features about it is that we have almost as many leaseholders as we do council tenants. As many members in the chamber will be aware, for years in the 80s and 90s, this borough saw literally thousands of council homes sold off and not replaced, often on terms that represented great financial value for the individuals concerned, but absolutely appalling value for the taxpayer. And while other councils may have sought to resist the wholesale sale-off of council homes, in Wandsworth this was actively aided and abetted by this Tory-controlled council, who did everything they possibly could really to accelerate the agenda. And I put it to you that actually today, the present generation of residents in Wandsworth is reaping the seeds that were sown back then. If you go to any council estate, you'll find that many of the homes that were sold off are now occupied not by homeowners, but by private renters on short-term, insecure contracts, often supported by the state at great cost via housing benefit. It's quite clear that were it not for this hemorrhaging over so many years of the council stock, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are in now, with an ever-growing proportion of the population competing for a hopelessly inadequate number of affordable properties, and communities torn apart by the impact of the government's welfare benefit reforms. Even now, the rate of properties lost from the council's housing stock continues to outpace the number of replacement homes built. Nor, I'm afraid, do I think we can be especially proud of the way in which we've run the housing stock. I think we have to judge by what we see, and I personally am still ashamed by the number of council properties I go into and are in a frankly disgraceful state, with mould on the walls, ancient windows, tired kitchens and bathrooms. We can debate the reasons for that, but there it is. Even when it comes to the council rents, I think we can see the system coming progressively unstuck. We've always had some of the highest council rents in the country, and the administration has argued for many years that this doesn't matter, as these will be covered for the poorest by housing benefit. But as illustrated in my question, I think, this is actually no longer true as a result of the impact of the government's welfare benefit changes. So yes, this paper proposes some positive measures. £20 million investment in temporary accommodation. Too late, but there you are. Better late than never. Money to upgrade kitchens and bathrooms. Again, something that we were calling for several years ago, but it's good to see it happen. But really, this is a mere sticking plaster, nowhere near to meeting the scale of the housing crisis that's affecting our residents. I think it's really important that instead of adopting a tone of self-congratulation and self-justification, that the party opposite does take some responsibility for the effects of the decisions that it and its predecessors have taken. The leader of the council likes to talk about housing aspirations, but the truth is that there isn't a group of residents for whom he can really claim to have delivered on these, whether council tenants or private tenants, those on lowest incomes, or indeed working professionals. I put it to you that actually the people of this borough have been let down by the housing legacy that's been bequested to them, and that the party opposite should apologise for that. Excuses and half-hearted promises won't do.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuff?
Thank you. It appears Councillor Thomas doesn't really come to our borough very often. If he judges our council estates to be in the condition he thinks they are in. He asked us to take responsibility for a number of things. I would very much, and I think all of us as members would like to take responsibility for the excellent housing stock that we have in this borough, the clean, safe environment that most of our council estates, in fact all of our council estates are in. Let's take responsibility for that. And let's also take responsibility, yes we should, for the fact that we empowered our residents. They invested by renting in those accommodation, they were able to buy their accommodation, and we empowered them to home ownership. I think we should take responsibility for that. What a complete load of nonsense. If he goes to any of our housing estates, he will see they're in very, very good condition, that the residents have got a high level of satisfaction in our council estates, and his only solution is that we all should go down to IKEA and buy them new kitchens. I mean, really, is that all they can do? I have never heard such a complete misdirected discussion on housing issues. Now, the benefits cap, okay, we hear that all the time by Labour, but let's also remember that having that cap at where it is, it still represents a medium income of over 30,000. I think that's generous, to be honest, and frankly, the debate and the quality of policies that come out of the opposition on housing is almost non-existent. We have had housing debates time and time again in this full chamber, and yet I'm still completely in the mist over what they actually want to do as a housing policy in this borough. I really do not know. I do know at a national level that there is a very clear direction. They want to bring back rental caps. That means that we're going to snuff out any chance to have a rental industry in this country which can provide high quality designed rental product, something that Wandsworth supports and wants to bring in a rental class of developments. We know that they want to build, they want to introduce a mansion tax. We discussed that last time. That will fund 1,000 new Scottish nurses, so that's brilliant news. And we also know that they want to build 200,000 new homes by extending CPO powers. Quite how they intend to do that in reality, we don't know, because that's all the detail we've had up until date. We know at a local level that there is really no steer. The opposition spokesman last week even used his own words. He said, "We're in opposition, we will oppose you as much as possible on as many issues as possible," before then saying he recommended having a cross-party housing group. Well, how on earth does he think we're going to have a cross-party housing group with them if they're also going to oppose us on everything else? It doesn't add up. So we're not going to do those sorts of things with an opposition who looks to play political game whenever they want to. I have not heard anything tonight so far which suggests a strategy, but I have heard that when it comes to regeneration and making long-term decisions which are for the benefit of this borough, for the wards that we all represent, they will find reasons to renege on their commitments to helping us deliver those schemes. I have lots of concerns with the opposition on housing. They did not talk at all about the difficult problems with decant, the fact that moving people around was a difficult issue that we need to balance when we look at our estate regeneration. In fact, the opposition housing spokesman described it as, well, I've moved 8 times in this borough, you know, it's no problem for me. Well, why can't it be a problem for them? Why should it be a problem for them? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not their choice. We're trying to provide them with new homes. If he chooses to move 8 times, that's great. You know, he can shop around the market if he wants, so he's got the freedom to do so. But when it comes to dealing with the difficult issues of estate regeneration, we need to make sure that our residents come first, and we need to balance the short-term issues with the longer-term gains. And they simply cannot do that at the moment. The more senior members can, and I think Councillor Belton's made some very useful comments tonight, and he made some very interesting points, which some of it I think we can work with him on. But I don't think we can work with some elements of this opposition group, because they're literally, it's all about political gain. And what Councillor Thomas started with there, I really have not got any idea where he's coming from, because this is not the picture of how our housing estates are. Our housing estates are in great condition, not comparing them to other boroughs where housing estates are in very poor condition, and he asks us to take responsibility for that. Of course we will. We've got a great housing stock in this borough. It's well run, the officers do a good job, and the residents have a high level of satisfaction. Yes, we'll take responsibility. Thank you.
Councillor Belton. Is it you, sir?
So I will be. No. I'd quite like an opportunity to express something of the situation, perhaps in a different way. Rent increases are not enormous, as proposed in this paper. They are, however, certainly for some, considerably above inflation. They're much further above, of course, increases in incomes, especially at the lowest level. A few years ago, the thought that the poorest in our society, as well as taking benefit cuts, should take rent increases when their incomes were stagnant or falling, as they get pushed from one minimum wage job or less than minimum wage job to another on 0 hours or otherwise, would have brought demonstrations on the streets. I'm rather sad that at the moment there aren't demonstrations on the streets, because I'm concerned, I mean, perhaps you're not concerned, someone who might have laughed there, I'm concerned that we're getting into a very dangerous position, a gap between haves and have-nots in this country, way beyond anything I ever expected to see. What did someone say the other day? The haves, the have-nots, and the have-yachts. Yachts as in the kind of thing that Councillor Carpenter has, you know, those kind of things. I just think in this week that members on both sides might just stop for a moment and look at what's happened in Greece in the last week. What might happen in Spain, was, as I understand it, and whether any party is standing up sufficiently for the have-nots. And I think I include, let's be honest, I think I include the Labour Party in that, whether we're being oppositionist enough to the forces of austerity and conventional budgeting that exists in this country. So I actually think that to increase rents higher than the levels of inflation, much higher than the levels of income, is something we should think more than twice about. I think we should not increase charges if at all possible, especially the essential one of housing in a time of falling real wages. And we all know there are falling real incomes for possibly a majority of the population. So I'm happy to oppose this, though I must say, apologies for not taking on board that I was particularly speaking on the issue, but I do think there is something that we should all take note of and haven't done so yet.
There's always a very commendable ad-lib. Councillor Peterkin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I start, let me just assure the Chamber that I won't be making any cheap political points about Councillor Carpenter's ownership or otherwise of yachts. Mr. Mayor, anyone who is as big a fan as I was of the late lamented TV show The Bill will recall that suspect is always warned that anything they may say will be used in evidence against them. To that end, I thought before I came in tonight, I'd better have a look at the blog run by the Labour housing spokesman, Councillor Hogg, as he always has such a lot to say on the subject of housing. Mr. Mayor, I can assure you that it's full of good things. There are photographs of his year 2014. As it turns out, Mr. Mayor, there are in fact people who are still willing to be pictured with members of the shadow cabinet. We saw the day that he and Mr. Martindale took some local youngsters to the Houses of Parliament for an exciting series of lectures on Battersea's place in the history of Marxist dialectic. And doubtless, Mr. Mayor, the Booby Prize in this year's Labour Club raffle, an audience with Chuka Ramuna. I suspect the poor mites have been put off politics for life. He laments on his blog the Borough Council's alleged failure to build new homes and bewails what he calls a lack of investment in our social housing stock. Now, I'll come back to the gulf between the reality-based community and the world apparently inhabited by the Labour group presently. But, Mr. Mayor, nothing on the blog could quite top off my particular favourite, which was the following statement. Jane Ellison has made an impressive start as Battersea's new MP, and it will be tough to defeat her. Mr. Mayor, having found something that and I suspect my colleagues on this side of the chamber could agree with, I decided it was time to cut my losses. But fear not, Agent Hogg, your secret is safe with us. We're having this debate tonight. Well, I have some remarks prepared here, but I'm not entirely sure what the proposition is. It appears to be that in some vague way, the increases in rent proposed in paper 1015 are in some way unreasonable, and that we ought to be tapping the housing revenue account for capital improvements. On the rent point, if we look back at what the Labour Party's published over the years on rent, they've said the self-same thing every year, during which time, contrary to Councillor Thomas's assertions, tenant satisfaction has remained at a very high level, precisely because the healthy cash flow maintained on the housing revenue account allows us to undertake an extremely extensive and ambitious programme of works to our social housing stock. They only need to look at the paper for details of this year's work. The Doddington West roof renewal, the communal walkway reconstruction on the Falcon estate, the relifting at Edwin Trayfoot Lodge, door entry system replacement in the Battersea Park estate, and window renewals on the Latchmere estate. I could go on, Mr. Mayor, but that's just a flavour of what these very modest increases will help to fund in Latchmere ward, represented by the previous speaker and the next speaker alone. They tell us that we should be dipping into and squandering the capital within the housing revenue account, so carefully husbanded, as we've heard tonight, over so many years. All I can say to that, Mr. Mayor, is it's bad enough having to listen to Ed Balls on the television without also having to endure his ideological acolytes on the opposition benches in this chamber. That way, as we've heard, lie Lambeth, Lewisham, Camden and Hackney. I said that I'd return to the contrast between what Labour says and the reality of what Labour does here in Wandsworth. Why so much difference? Why is it that they all say that they're in favour of increasing investment in our social housing stock, yet when it falls due to provide the financing for that investment, as this paper does, they make the Reverend Ian Paisley circa 1972 look reasonable and accommodating? Why is it that they bemoan the supposed lack of affordable housing in this borough, but when we plan 90 new affordable housing units in Battersea, out come the faux outrage, the petitions and the protest meetings? Mr. Mayor, I've considered these points long and hard, and I believe I may be able to enlighten the chamber. Apparently there's an election coming up. The party opposite will miss no opportunity for shroud waving. There's no long-held and oft-repeated view that they will not reverse if they think there are a few votes in it. They will miss no opportunity, however ill-identified, to tell the voters of Wandsworth that they're victims and that they ought to be nursing a grievance. But, Mr. Mayor, they'll be disappointed. Those voters have a long and proud tradition in correctly identifying which party has a plan to keep rents at a reasonable level and the quality of social housing high. And distinguishing it from the party that simply flits aimlessly from concocted gripe to concocted gripe, never telling anyone how they would improve matters and shamelessly reversing themselves when they deem it politically expedient. It's that opportunism and cynicism that they saw through last year in returning this administration to office, and I'm confident, as we all are on this side of the chamber, that they'll see through it once again on May the 7th in re-electing Conservative MPs here in Wandsworth. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peterkin. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This paper covers council rents, money to tackle the homelessness crisis, and elements of Councillor Covindier's new housing strategy, and I think there's positive and negative sides to each of those. On council rents, the average increase this year will be 2.2%, which we think is fair, but there's rather an oddball distribution, so that almost no one will actually pay that amount. And I think sometimes you have to look at a policy and just apply a sense check. So 10,000 of our tenants will pay less than £1 a week extra, and there's about 3,500 tenants who are going to pay 8 times as much as that. A really odd distribution, and almost no one in between. And 1,300 of those families, paying the £400 extra a year, are not receiving any form of housing benefit. Most of them are older families. Some may be too proud to claim. Some will be working for minimum wage. In terms of the number of people affected and the financial impact, this is comparable to the bedroom tax, the social sector size criterion, and I believe the Council's taking an unnecessary risk. We know Wandsworth has yet to get to grips with its homelessness crisis, It should be praised for committing to spend £20 million on temporary accommodation. As Councillor Thomas says, unfortunately, it is too little, too late, and we saw that these new properties being bought will be entirely outside the borough. I wrote to the council recently about a Tooting mother who became homeless with her 3 children because of a difficult family situation, and she works and studies in the borough, but was offered a final offer that she should move to a private rented home in West Bromwich, 100 miles from her family, from her children's schools. And when she said that property was unsuitable, the council responded with an eviction notice. And this behaviour damages the reputation of this council. Wandsworth has been condemned by Sandwell Council's leader for treating people like cattle and moving them around the country in order to cut costs. The council's housing revenue account reserves, by the way, remain above £250 million. Last week in the Housing Committee, we discussed the new housing strategy from the Tory leader, and I hope both sides can now move forward together and agree that, the council's current housing policies are not delivering, that low and middle income families are being priced out of the borough. We can agree that aspirations to own are not being met, and that our policies have a polarising effect between rich and poor. And we can agree all those things because they are the leader's words in his strategy paper. And I think the leader's paper is welcome. It's heartfelt and it's bold, and it does attempt to sketch out a vision for the future. There's many welcome elements. There's 5,000 homes over the next decade for local people, hundreds of new homes on council land and improvements to estates, increasing the number of low-cost homes delivered by property developers, a Wandsworth housing company, and longer stable renting contracts. In fact, there was such a surprising number of Labour ideas in the paper. If we weren't consulted, it certainly appears that we were listened to. There are, of course, areas of disagreement. I mean, we object to the fact the council appears to be turning its back on social housing as a concept. There's an impression that vulnerable residents will be pushed into private renting or out of the borough. And I think there's also a general lack of detail. We don't really say what a local person is, what a working person might be, what affordable and low cost actually mean in practice. So there's still a way to go. But I'd say the main problem is that the strategy is too little and it is too late. We've been asleep at the wheel for too long, and I'll just finish with 3 facts of things that are entirely within the council's control that say where we are. Just 3 of the first 2,400 flats to be built on the Battersea Power Station site are affordable, family-sized homes. Wandsworth sold off 128 council flats last year and built 2 replacement homes, and nearly 1,000 homeless local families will spend tonight in council temporary accommodation. That's the reality today, and people will judge the council on results, not good intentions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hong. Councillor Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually just reading the recommendations in the back here because I got a bit lost in this debate because I understood it was to approve £53.992 million capital programme and an average rent increase of £2.90, and we've got onto the subject of kitchens and homeless and a whole variety of other things, and the housing strategy, which I imagine we're going to be discussing in greater detail at another meeting. I was very nice to Councillor Thomas at the beginning, and he threw it back in my face, which is so I shall withdraw the hope that he rejoins the committee. No, not really. I mean, I think he sort of rather let the cat out of the bag, didn't he, with this sort of attack on the right to buy, because we all know that the Labour Party is completely committed to the right to buy. Unlike when they were completely opposed to the right to buy, they now recognise that this is exactly what should have happened all along. Ed Miliband, I think, has actually apologised for the previous policy. But it still creeps out, doesn't it, that there is this opposition to the right to buy. And it's quite interesting that all these properties that get sold, they just disappear, don't they, off the face of the earth. They just get knocked down and we just get spaces there. Nobody lives in them. The homes are just lost. What utter nonsense. They provide affordable housing for a very good number of people. The right to buy is enormously popular, and long may it continue, and this borough should have should show no regret whatever for pushing it forward, just as we're showing no regret now for encouraging people to buy. The first people under the new right to buy legislation were from Wandsworth. I'm actually very proud of that, and I would hope the people, the members opposite, would be as well. Councillor Belton sort of did bring us back to what we're here for, and he did say that the increases are a little bit above inflation. Well, we know that because the recommendation is CPI plus 1%. That is the government's advice on the matter. Councillor Hogg mentioned that some of the increases are in excess of that. Of course, that's correct, because we are moving toward target rent, something which is recommended in the Independent Council Tax Commission report. I think we mentioned that before. We will keep mentioning all these little snippets that we find in there. So that is why, and you know, as we've seen in the previous question, even with the larger increase, some people are still only paying £46 a week. It's going to take them a very long time indeed to get to these target rents. What Councillor Belton forgot to mention was that 2 years ago, when I think he was a member of the committee, an increase of £3.44 was proposed, which was supported by the opposition, actually. So that's actually a rather larger increase than we're suggesting this time. Wonder why it was acceptable then, but not now? Oh, yes. The nail's been hit on the head by Councillor Peterkin. There is an election coming. There wasn't an election then. The Borough Residents Forum, who I think would claim to speak for the interests of residents and leaseholders, were perfectly happy with these modest increases. They do represent the people they speak for, but of course none of them are standing for election in 100 days' time. Finally, the £20 million is too little too late. Well, I don't know how many yachts that would pay for, but it's certainly going to pay for a number of houses. The capital programme is being increased from an original budget this year of 32 million to more than double that for next year, 68 million. That's an incredible investment in our housing stock, something which I think we should be very proud of. We couldn't do it if we kept frittering away our reserves, which is what we're recommended to do constantly. We have major investment programmes in some of the more deprived parts of the borough, and I hope over the coming years similar investment programmes in other parts of the borough. Wandsworth, I think, has a very proud record. As Councillor Peterkin said, very high satisfaction levels, and long may that continue. So I really am astonished that even though the opposition have said, well, these are actually modest increases, they're still going to vote against them. They can always change their minds. Let's hope they will.
Councillors, the motion now before the Council is the adoption of the recommendations in paragraph 1 of report number 1 concerning housing rents and service charges. So please indicate by show of hands those for the motion. And those against? The result of the motion is 32 for and 11 against. The motion is therefore carried. Right, we move on now to paragraph 2. That is for decision. Is that recommendation approved?